Hey, Media People podcast listeners. If you enjoy the podcast, then you're going to love our newsletter, appropriately named the Media People Newsletter. Delivered right to your inbox, each edition is a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or go to mediapeople.beehiiv.com. That's BEEHIIV. Thanks for listening to the Media People podcast, lively and insightful chats with the people who power the media industry. I'm your host, Victor Genova. For more episodes, you can go to mediapeople.ca or subscribe wherever you get podcasts, including youtube.com/@mediapeoplepodcast. Views expressed by participants are personal. Rob Meyers is the managing director and partner at Versus, a studio crafting highly creative, one-of-a-kind work for brands and agencies. A New Jersey native, pop culture played a big role in Rob's early life. He refers to himself as an avid reader, everything from books to comics, and was heavily invested in both TV and movies. Studying television, radio, and film screenwriting at Syracuse University provided the education Rob needed to pursue his interests professionally. He's held a number of creative roles and has written and produced for the likes of BET, ESPN, the NFL, Nickelodeon, CNN, and USA Networks, to name a few. Rob Meyers stops by to chat about growing up in New Jersey, the life of a freelance writer and producer, why he started working for a homeless charity after 9/11, and how Versus is shaking up creative advertising.
Versus is a global creative production studio that crafts one-of-a-kind work for agencies, brands, networks, and streamers. As a studio, we create culture-defining, ownably original campaigns by leaning into a challenger mentality and a problem-solving ethos. To us, Versus is not just a name. It's a philosophy that defines how we approach creative and production each day. As the managing director of Versus, I oversee both our production and sales teams. I also lay the groundwork and shape the vision that we have for the Versus that lies ahead for us in the future.
Rob, thanks so much for stopping by today. Let's go back to the beginning. You're from suburban New Jersey.
That is correct.
And you were born and raised there?
I was. I spent a lot of time in New York City growing up because that's where my father's business was. But ultimately, I was a suburban kid living in Bergen County, New Jersey.
How close is that to Woodbridge, New Jersey?
Not too far. Definitely drivable. Definitely been to the mall there once or twice. I think that's how everybody in New Jersey judges distance, is by how far the malls are from one another.
The reason I mention that is I've got distant family. I think they're my mom's second or third cousins, and they're the ones that came over from Italy that went through Ellis Island, and then they settled in New York, New Jersey. So Woodbridge, New Jersey is the extent of where my family is. So just wondering how close they were, even though I know New Jersey is a fairly small state compared to others.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a tight-knit area, and I definitely am still very close with the people that I grew up with. Obviously, my family is from North Jersey and still, for the most part, all living there, raising their own families now.
I love that you brought up the mall, though, because were you a Kevin Smith fan, or are you a Kevin Smith fan? Because that man has done everything to put New Jersey on the map cinematically.
Oh, 100%. I think you have to admire who Kevin Smith is and what he was able to do. I think, at a certain point, everybody has wanted to lean into that Clerks story, both for just how scrappy he was able to be and what he was able to create from it, and also how he was really able to tap into something that was really very real and genuine, especially for somebody like me that comes from New Jersey.
And you spent your whole life in New Jersey.
Up until I got out of school. I grew up there. I went to grade school, high school there. I wound up ultimately spending some time there right after graduation. But I've been in New York City now for going on 25 years. I don't think I could live any other place at this point in my life.
And you were a big athlete, we'd say, growing up. And the three sports that were central were soccer, basketball, and tennis. How did those three come about? Because I don't see football or baseball in there, and that surprises me.
The funny thing is that when you're talking about football, I definitely played, recreationally. My family it's an interesting setup with my family. I was the only boy. I was the youngest. I think there was a level of protection that, my mother had placed on me, had a lot of concerns about how football is dangerous and how it could, be very, I could get injured very easily. So she was very happy for me to choose soccer as a sport as far as like the fall season went. Of course, soccer is really kind of just as dangerous and there's less padding. And I definitely got hurt just as much as any football player ever would. So I don't think she really got what she was bargaining for when she steered me that direction.
I love how you said that she was just overprotective of you because you were the only boy in the family or the only son they had. It kind of sounded like a domestic suburban version of Saving Private Ryan.
A little bit. There's a real thing about being the youngest, and when you flip the dynamic by being the youngest and the only boy who is then kind of tasked to be the protector, it's a very unique way of growing up.
It's funny because usually the oldest, and I'm speaking from experience, you're a bit of the trailblazer. Like the parents are like figuring out what to do with the oldest, but because you were, I guess, also the oldest and only male, they kind of were like, okay, there are things we can do with Rob, but that we did with his sisters, but then there are things that we're kind of starting from scratch with.
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I don't think they knew what they were getting into, and at the same time, definitely fatigued by having already raised three children.
How big of a role did pop culture play?
It's funny, the two subjects tie together pretty well. Pop culture was pretty huge. I mean, I don't want to mistake anything by saying that, I'm a part of an incredibly loving family and we're all very, very close. But growing up, you have to think about the fact that as the only boy, there was definitely a little bit of an outsider sensibility within the home. And so pop culture was where I turned to and turned all my attention towards for all the times that, the girls were together. I was the person that was watching a show, reading a comic, playing a video game. It was very much something that drove me towards all of my later in life interests.
What was your go-to comic?
I would have to say Green Lantern. It's
Really?
not.
Didn't see that one coming.
Yeah, no, it's not. It's not the typical one, but I definitely think about Green Lantern as something that sparked an interest in just general creativity for me. I mean, this was literally a superhero whose constructs from his mind were his greatest weapons. So, to think about it through that lens, I think it was a superhero, but it was also a nod towards where I felt like my greatest strength would be when I got older.
Hal Jordan, Jon Stewart, Kyle Reiner, Alan Scott. Who was your favorite?
Definitely Hal Jordan, no question.
Yeah, he's the OG. How did you feel about the Green Lantern film? It had so much potential.
I think you said it really well. It had so much potential. And honestly, maybe if it was made 5 years later, we'd be talking about something very, very different. Was it a letdown? Absolutely. Was there a degree of uh, geeky enthusiasm just to see it up on screen? Absolutely as well.
Visually, I thought it was great. There was just no script behind it.
Oh,
I was
no,
really looking forward to it, and yeah, I mean, the one thing I think they did well was they mocked the fact that the domino mask doesn't really hide your identity from people you know. And I was like, I'm glad
yeah,
they got that out of the way. At least we're not mocking the audience.
totally. And honestly, think about it now, right? And look at that cast and think about how with the right script, what could that cast have done? I mean, Ryan Reynolds, Mark Strong,
Hmm.
um, you
Blake
know,
Lively.
Blake
We had
Lively.
Peter Skarsgård.
Absolutely. All along all along the way, you had incredibly talented actors and actresses that were a part of that movie. So it was 100% a letdown of the script.
Why do you cite your grandfather and your father without question as your biggest influences?
When I was growing up, my grandfather actually cared for me after school every day, and the love that he showed me and the guidance that he gave me and his absolute joy for life is just something that I've just never forgotten. I mean, this was quite literally a man who somehow was able to con me into cleaning up the yard and thinking it was a game. I mean, everything about him was genuinely creative. And, I think what he brought to the everyday experience is something that I've always strived to be able to recreate for everybody, from my kids, for my coworkers, and for my employees. You bring When you bring a love for life into what you do every day, you really can shape the way people visualize the path ahead of them. And with my dad, I would absolutely say that he just taught me everything. This was a man that uh, in a strange way, he took so much joy in just explaining how to do things and making me a part of his life, whether it was bringing me to work with him. He owned a restaurant just outside of NYU for most of my young life, to just, how to clean the gutters, right? I mean, it was an experience to be with him. And, everything about his work ethic is what I've strived to also be able to mimic as I grow older.
Okay, so you mentioned that the family owned a restaurant, but interestingly enough, your first job wasn't waiting tables or washing plates at the restaurant. It was actually working at a farmer's market in the Hamptons. So tell us a little bit about that job and what did you learn about yourself?
Well, technically, I would absolutely have to go back and say that my first job was at the restaurant.
Okay.
Of course, I got paid in love and comic books as opposed to an actual job.
You
But
know,
my
for a
first,
kid, that's quite the currency.
I mean, it's
Oh,
not bad. I definitely wasn't complaining. I didn't ask for any raises. But yeah, my first paying job was actually at a farmer's market on the east end of Long Island. It was actually quite a scene back in the day. Yeah, I spent, my very, very early and quite illegally teen years working as a stock boy, bagging groceries, working pretty hard. And again, going back to talking about work ethic, I think when you're working on, the retail side, or you're working on, food service, like, you're learning exactly how hard work can be, and you are learning how to do it with a smile on your face. And I actually think that it's something that, you know, it's really a great thing, I think, for everybody to make sure that they have a touch point in those industries as they're growing up, because it really doesn't get any harder than that.
I completely agree. That's why I always ask people, what do they learn about themselves? And, some people will say, labor isn't for me. And that's why I worked a lot harder in university or college because I didn't want to be doing a job where there was a lot of heavy lifting.
Yeah,
Oh,
no, and at the same time, there's lessons to be learned by just being able to complete repetition, to put in long hours, to know that you've been tasked with something that absolutely needs to get done, and the time that it needs to get done. All of these are lessons that I think are applicable to almost any job you have later in life.
and I'd like to throw in there dealing with people.
100%. 100%. One of the things that I think is interesting about having jobs in like a service industry is the value of learning small talk. It's something that is so valuable when you're later in life, learning how to, formulate relationships, break the ice with people. It's definitely something that the earlier in life that you master that art, the better.
Why did you attend Syracuse University? So you left New Jersey, you moved to upstate New York, and you were studying in their television, radio, and film screenwriting program. So what attracted you to that?
Originally, I actually started out in the journalism department. Writing was always something that I knew I wanted to have as a cornerstone of what my career would be. But originally, I thought that it would take place more in either the print side or broadcast journalism, and Syracuse is well renowned for that school. So I was excited to go there. Funny thing happened along the way. I definitely would listen in. I would hear more about the hardships that you would face trying to break through in that industry, the far off places you'd be sent to build your career, the broken marriages that were inevitable if you were in this world, and the deadlines, the constant deadlines that you would be facing. And naively, I thought to myself, I don't want any of that stuff. Certainly the deadline thing. I can't imagine life under a deadline constantly. And so I moved into the television department and ultimately into the world that I am now, which is 100% a deadline every single day.
Really interesting, though, about wanting to start off as a journalist. Take me through it a little bit more. Like, what inspired you to get into that? And the reason I bring that up is that you are definitely not my first guest that either thought about going into journalism and then pivot into something closer, or they started in journalism and then after graduation they said, you know what, I don't think I can make a living doing this, or it's not what I thought it would be. Like, what inspired you to be a journalist? Because we're talking about your early life and it's sports and pop culture. So it seems like just screenwriting would have been kind of the natural progression for that, not journalism.
Very, very fair point. I think that journalism to me as I was growing up was a better application of something as a career. Whereas I never really thought growing up that you could really work doing something that you loved so much. I know that sounds a little foolish, but there was a there was sort of a division for me. Like I don't want to blur the lines between what I love and what I do for a living, because what if I stop loving what I do for a living?
Oh, that's a good way of putting it. Because a lot of athletes, that's why they retire. They're just, I mean, maybe their body is checked out, but at the same time, they kind of stop having fun. They start dreading getting up and training or going to practice or going to games, and they find themselves looking at their watch or looking at the calendar and at the ball or the puck.
Absolutely, and that was my number one greatest fear. And so, I started off in journalism, feeling like there was a purpose to it, that there was a very beautiful uh, goal for being a journalism, that seeking the truth was something that created this great value for society. And the more I got into the nitty gritty of what the industry is like and what the expectations are and what the realities are, I think that, the shine wore off a little bit. And at the same time, I was very fortunate enough to have a relative that was in the industry who was basically introducing me to the production side of marketing. And it seemed like there was this place where I could be passionate about what I did every day without risking the sort of escapism that I would still want to always have.
And after graduation, you jumped right into the freelance market. And was this a staffing company called FDG? Have I got it right?
That is correct. It actually, I started freelancing there and then was ultimately brought on staff. This is actually where the company that I was talking about came in. My brother-in-law has been an incredible role model for me as well. He was in this space before I was and took all the time and attention to be a great mentor for me. His company was called FDG, and I worked under him for the first couple of years of my career. He gave me so many wonderful opportunities to both write and produce for big name networks, everything from ESPN to Nickelodeon. And it really was sort of a foundational moment for me because I, on the one hand, got to learn everything there was about being creative in this industry. And on the other hand, I got to learn what it was like and what kind of responsibilities were sort of thrust upon you when you were an entrepreneur and you were running your own company.
Let's touch on a couple of points there because you kind of could group a lot of your responsibilities into two categories, one as a writer and then one as an associate producer. So let's take a step back and talk about your writing gigs there, because give us a couple of the clients that you were writing for, because you were doing script writing for them. And what did that script writing entail?
And copywriting kind of entailed a lot in that space. It was everything from a 30-second spot to a 5-minute corporate video. And I was fortunate enough to be introduced to clients that were across all sorts of genres. So like I said, I worked in the sports world for places like ESPN and the NFL. I got to touch back on the journalism world in MSNBC just as they were really launching. So it was kind of a pivotal time in their history. And even stretch, a little bit out of my comfort zone by doing things for places like BET and Nickelodeon.
What would you do for inspiration? Like, say they come to you with a deadline because everyone's got deadlines in this industry, and they say, Rob, we need a 30-second spot about this, and it needs to be produced, or we need the copy in about an hour. Like, how do you get past writer's block? Like, what's the first thing you do for inspiration?
Pop culture. It just digest everything, watch everything, read everything. I think I've been pretty voracious when it comes to the amount of content that I consume, and I didn't need YouTube back in the day to be able to do it. I just read every paper and every magazine, watched every single thing there was, and I tried to find connections and apply them to, how it could better another brand. For MSNBC, I'll never forget one of the most successful projects I had done for them at the time, something that they really, really loved and gravitated towards, actually ripped off a bit of a tagline from Transformers. So,
Tell me it was rollout.
oh, it's no, it's more that meets the eye. And
Gotcha.
and they absolutely loved it and ran with it as part of their campaign for a good quarter.
Do you have like a notebook where you jot down random ideas that pop into your head? Like you might find that idea and go, I don't need it at this moment, but I know I might need it at a later date or I want to reference it. So I'm just going to put it down here before the thought falls out of my head.
It's funny. I did use pen and paper almost religiously and created so many of these kind of notebooks like you're spelling out right now. And then I would never know where to find what I wrote down when I needed it best. In a weird way, that might be one of the greatest features of the iPhone, as far as I'm concerned. The Notes app was revolutionary for me in regards to fixing that problem that I created.
Let's talk about your time as an associate producer, though. You'd already mentioned it earlier that you were getting greater exposure to the business side of marketing and the creative side. But how did you adapt to that? Because you go through school and it's all about screenwriting, copywriting. You're on the creative side, and all of a sudden now you're swapping out Microsoft Word with Excel, and you're looking at P&Ls and payroll. Did that excite you? Did that take a bit of time to get interested in?
I would definitely say the latter. I am not nerdy about accounts receivable or data processing necessarily, um, but it was the people side of producing that I really, really gravitated towards. And maybe even this is something born out of the lessons I learned when I was even younger. But as a writer, it's a very isolating experience. I mean, it can be wonderful to be in that zone creating something, but it can also feel a little lonely at times. And as a producer, I got to really tap into what it was like to show a form of leadership, have a team that depended upon you, gave you an opportunity to engage with new people every day, whether it was clients or freelancers or staff. I think the production world opened my eyes to how much I really uh, need a sense of community around myself, and definitely laid the groundwork for almost every single role I had afterwards.
We're going to take a quick break. Enjoying this episode? Of course you are, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Complement your listening experience by subscribing to the Media People newsletter at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or at mediapeople.beehive.com. It's a mix of original and curated content designed to feed your curiosity while aiding in personal development. On top of more podcasts, we'll connect you with articles, interviews, and industry events. Subscribe at mediapeople.ca/newsletter or mediapeople.beehive.com. What brought you to the Coalition for the Homeless? Because this seems like a bit of a pivot. Like you're getting out of the creative space, you're into marketing because, correct me if I'm wrong, you're the manager of annual giving. But what did that entail and what brought you to that organization?
I mean, this is something I'm sure a lot of people faced post 9/11. I think the world sort of changed over, in a moment. And coming out of 9/11, I definitely felt like there was a role that I needed to fill in my community. There were better ways that I could apply my talents that could help people. And especially in New York, right? At that point in time, think the whole country was hurting, but specifically downtown New York, which is actually where the coalition continues to be headquartered. Um, I was very fortunate to have an opportunity to take a role there that oversaw their development department, and really got the message out about how people needed support, needed solutions, needed a way forward. At the time, I think I thought that that would be a much longer road for me. But eventually, the media world did come calling for me, and I felt like I had done something really, really special and was ready to go back to where I felt like I maybe belonged a little more.
Did working at an organization that dealt with a very, very deep topic like homelessness, did that take a toll on you?
I think it definitely took a toll on me. I think that it's an experience I think that everybody should have, whether it's just volunteer work or if you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to work for a nonprofit. I think it's very important. It's something that has stayed with me. It makes me very conscious about making sure that Versus is doing as much pro bono work as it can. I think that ultimately my work at the coalition showed me that there are ways to do things at a very street level, and there are ways to do things at a very high level. And I felt a sense of um, I think I felt a greater sense of contribution on a street level, which didn't necessitate me working for that. It just necessitated me being a part of my community, volunteering more, and making sure that I kept my eye on the world around me.
You already mentioned it that after leaving the Coalition for the Homeless, you went back into advertising and you landed at the Nth Degree Creative Group. And interestingly enough, you're working as a writer and a producer. So I guess at this point, you're tapping into a lot of the experience you had back at the FDG Group and really putting that to work. Take us through what the Nth Degree Group was, creative group was, or is, and just what your role entailed there.
So very similar to my time at FGG, just at a much more senior level at that point. A lot of the same faces and names, a definite return to, both a comforting, culture, but also a new world open to me as far as responsibilities were, took place. So at nth degree, I definitely moved a little bit more into the broadcast design space and the identity space. I think that I learned how branding really, really works. I had some incredible creative mentors that were creative directors and ECDs at nth degree, and it was very interesting to me because it gave me a new understanding and a new appreciation for marketing from a non 30-second spot lens.
As you're starting to move up and gain more responsibilities, I guess you'd be further and further away from some of the things that you were doing early on, like writing the copy. Is it safe to say that? And if that is true, was that difficult for you, being more of a coach and less of a player?
I like the way you put that. I think that's very true. I think that as I grew, it was definitely the production space where I felt both a little bit more comfortable and a lot more appreciation. I'm flattered to be able to say that it was at this point in time that I started creating relationships with clients that to this day are now have followed me from multiple locations to being clients at Versus. Uh, at nth degree, I definitely learned more about leadership. I had learned how to create a sense of a company culture. All of these things are huge and pivotal to the success that we would later have at Versus.
And the company was acquired by Click 3X, and your responsibilities grew. And now you were managing a team of 25 people it started with, but it was probably closer to 100 when you left the company, if I got that right.
Yeah, it started off as being absorbed. My team at Nth was absorbed into an amazing company called Click 3X. No longer around in New York, but a huge, um, you know, one of the cornerstone operations for a very long time in post production. It was a bit of a transition for me because we were essentially taking a very design driven, motion graphics oriented team and absorbing it into the world of CG and visual effects. So I was both in a leadership role and on the job training at the same time, which actually, in hindsight, was kind of an exciting time for me. I also, as you mentioned, became part of a much larger team than I had ever been a part of. I mean, most of the design shops that I had worked at prior were pretty small places that ramped up as needed, whereas Click had a very, very, robust in-house staff team. When I started there, it was probably only about 25 people. And to your point, when I left, it was getting closer to 100. So I was there as this company's reach just expanded to this massive space that kind of hit everything from motion graphics and visual effects to editorial and live action.
So you definitely say the resources you had available to you were far greater than what they were at Nth Degree.
100%, 100%. And some of the most talented people that I've ever had the pleasure of working with, almost all of which, at least all of which I was able to, were people that I brought over to Versus either in a freelance or long-term capacity because I was just so thrilled to be able to continue working with them.
Did the culture change much after the acquisition? Like, did you find there was an adjustment period where you had to remind yourself that even though there are many things that look the same, I'm not at the same company I was at, say, last week?
I mean, frankly, it was immediate, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but we definitely were absorbed into an incredibly different culture, a different production process, a different mindset in general. But again, I I was so fortunate to formulate some relationships there that helped me grow and that I've continued to, engage in to this day.
Okay, so Rob, let's bring things full circle. Versus, let's start with where the idea came from.
It's interesting. At Click 3X, I had risen to a place where I was running, not just running the entertainment division there, but I was also an executive producer for the company as a whole. In my entertainment role, I needed to find a creative director who could help me shape the future for that department. And I met an incredible designer and animator by the name of Justin Barnes, who the more we worked together, the more I felt like I had a really good symbiotic relationship with him. And so after a little bit of a trial period, I sort of asked him, I was like, can you come on board? I would love for you to be a part of this team. I'd love for you to lead this team. I think, we have something here that would be pretty amazing. And, to his very nature, Justin said, I feel the exact same way, but I don't want to work for you. Leave Click 3X, come join me. And it was such a scary and exciting idea at the time, but ultimately I had literally just had a child and it just felt too daunting to me. So I said, I don't think this is the right time. And he said, I'm gonna keep my eye on you. I'm gonna start something and when I'm ready for you, I'm gonna give you a call. And about a year later is when that happened, and I was ready. He was ready, and Versus was sort of off to the races at that point.
So what was the market gap that you saw that you knew Versus could capitalize on?
Justin and I definitely both shared this sensibility that there was too much tradition and there was too much of a sense of this is the way that things are done that existed in the advertising industry. And so Versus was literally named to be a counter to that. It was like a promise or a statement to everybody around us that we were going to do things in a different way, that we were going to be efficient and we were going to accept challenges and we were going to be fearless and not afraid to just literally kind of just spit in the eye of what tradition really was.
And let's talk about what the company looks like now compared to, say, day number one.
The relationships that I have built throughout my career was a little bit of a journey, and I think I was always, in a sense, scouting for these people that I would want to surround myself with. And so what's exciting for me is I've built this team at Versus, and there's so many fresh new faces that I'm like thrilled to be a part, that to have as a part of my team. But I've also managed to bring people back into my ecosystem and into my community from all of these spots along the way. These relationships that I knew were going to be, very important to me as I grew older. And now I have this opportunity to bring them back under my own umbrella. It's a very, very exciting thing to be able to have done.
I wanted to ask you, as someone running a creative shop, how is artificial intelligence playing a role in your day to day, if it even is?
I think you'd be foolish to ignore the possibilities that exist with AI right now. I think it's scary. And just like everything else with Versus that scared us, we had to lean into it. Um, we're we're very proud to have been a partner of OpenAI in creating a short film for the Tribeca Film Festival this year. My partner, our ECD, Justin Barnes, is speaking on the subject of AI at the Adobe Max conference in a few weeks. The the promise that this delivers has to outweigh the fear of what it'll replace. And I think Versus wants to be at the forefront of creating ways to engage with AI that can really make a difference.
Rob, if anyone listening to this podcast wants to learn more about Versus or just get in touch with you, how can they reach you?
I am happy to respond to any inquiries through my LinkedIn page, through our website, which is vsnyc.tv. Um, I welcome as much engagement as possible. I'm very, very proud to say that I work hard to answer every email that comes my way, whether it's from students looking for advice, whether it's a job offer, or a job opportunity from a client. Um, Please do reach out.
Rob, this has been a great chat. Are you ready for rapid fire questions?
Been looking forward to it since we started.
All right, the campaign you're most proud of.
It's absolutely Live Earth, which I'm not sure if you remember, was a global event that took place in 7 continents. It was a concert series that I worked for a few months to help facilitate all of the branding and graphic content for screens for. Definitely, without question, the largest thing I've ever worked on. I think with deliverables in the thousands, um, being a giant stadium for the actual event, both in the truck and in the stadium, and literally on stage was just an epic experience.
Your favorite movie?
Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. It is everything. It is brilliantly crafted. It is an amazing script. It is a awe-inspiring directorial experience. It is the most talented actor and actresses that I can imagine in one film. And I was very, very fortunate to actually get an opportunity to see a rough cut of it. And even in its earliest stages, it was obvious that it was brilliant.
If Hollywood were to make a movie based on your life story, who would you want to play you?
It's a tough one because the comment I got growing up most often was that James Spader was somebody that I look like, but I absolutely never shared his attitude. So I would say if you're going just on looks, let's say James Spader in the 80s and 90s.
My follow-up, if Hollywood were to make that movie based on your life story, what would you call it?
My grandmother had this amazing saying that I think is both somewhat optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. I don't know, but she would say, "Cheer up, things could always be worse." And that is absolutely a philosophy that I think would make for a good book title or movie title.
Your favorite book?
So the first book that Dave Eggers ever wrote was a heartbreaking work of staggering genius, and it gripped me the minute I started reading it. It's one of those books that I had the time to do it, but I didn't put down. I literally read the whole book in one sitting over the course of an entire day. And I think I've probably read it every other year for every year that's happened since then.
Your favorite song?
It would be a Pink Floyd classic, Wish You Were Here. I would also call it the best concert that I've ever been to, which was Giant Stadium back in '94.
The best advice you have ever received?
I think I actually already answered this question. My brilliant and wonderful grandmother had told me, "Cheer up, things could always be worse," and I think that it showed so much of her heart in that. She was somebody that was always looking for a bright side on things, no matter how grim things could be. There was always the possibility that it could be worse, which is kind of a way of saying enjoy what you have right now.
If you could go back in time and give your younger self advice, what would you say?
Going back to what we started from as far as a conversation goes, is that it's not a problem to love what you do, and you don't need to separate your worlds as far as what you're passionate about. I think bring as much of your passions into what you do every day as possible, and do it in a way that's true to yourself. Like, feel free to be a nerd, be weird, be different, say things that people don't agree with. I think the more that you can create that sort of sense of self, the better.
My signature closing question: if you weren't in media, what would you be doing and why?
I'm a very full circle person, and I definitely would want to make sure that I am giving back to the community. So if I wasn't doing what I do right now at Versus, I would want to make sure that I was participating either in a nonprofit or in the political arena, something that ensured that the problems that people faced were things that I was concentrating on resolving for them.
And we're going to end things right here. Rob, thanks for stopping by.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure being here.